Hello, I'm here today. I'm going to tell you about Booker T. Washington's his autobiography was called Up from Slavery, and I'm going to just give you a brief summary of chapter one. The chapter is called A Slave Among Slaves. So basically, Booker T. Washington, here's what he says, some of the things he says in the chapter. He was born as a slave on a plantation in Franklin County, Virginia, around 1858 or 1859. He doesn't know exactly what year, and he doesn't know what month. He didn't know what month he was born. He says growing up, they lived like basically in a log cabin, 14 feet by 16 feet square cabin. He lived with his mother, brother, and sister. Okay, he did not know who his father was. He had heard that his father may have been a white man that lived around the area. On the plantation, his mother was the plantation cook. So he says she was often busy. Rarely did they sit down and like eat dinner together, him and his family. She was always busy. He says mother would come home late sometimes and she would wake them up, 11 or 12 o'clock at night and feed them dinner after like maybe she cooked some chicken or something like that and she would feed them dinner. As a child, his jobs on the plantation, he says he was responsible. He says he was a small child, so he really couldn't like do a lot of heavy work that other kids might have been able to do. So he cleaned the yards up. He would take water to the men who were working in the fields, and like every day or often, he was in charge of taking corn to the mill, which was like a 3 mile walk. He said there and 3 mile walk back to have it ground up. He describes like the first pair of shoes he ever got. They were made of wood, said they were very uncomfortable. Towards the end of the chapter, he talks about the Civil War ending. Okay, that was something that slaves thought about a lot. Was they knew that a war was going on, and they knew it was like North versus South, based on slavery. He said they got a lot of news from usually. Some slaves would be like listening to what they heard white people talking about, and they report that news back to other slaves. So one day they were all brought up to what's called the big house, which is the slave owner's house. And when they got there, the slave owner and all his like family was outside. Said they looked sad, and there was a soldier there who read the Emancipation Proclamation to them, told them that they were free. He says at this news, many of the slaves were very, very happy because they never thought that they would ever be free. He says they then left the big house and they went back to their slave quarters. He said by the time they had got to their slaves' quarters, many of the slaves were not as happy as they were because they realized now that they had the great responsibility of taking care of themselves. And many of them had never had to do that. They never had to think for themselves. They never had to provide for themselves. They never had to be educated, any of that kind of stuff. She said some of the older slaves they made deals so that they could stay around their former slave owner and just maybe work for them or whatever, something like that, because they didn't know they had no other. Basically, their life was, he said, kind of like they were older, elderly, and that's all they had ever known was like to be a slave. So they were afraid to be on their own. So that was chapter one of Booker T. Washington's Up from Slavery. It was called A Slave Among Slaves. Basically, he's just describing the beginnings of his life as a child. Thank you for listening. I'll be back with chapter two soon.